Newark Holy Stones, which is the topic on Street Apologist Live today. I'm your host, Vocab Malone. This is a show where we serve the underserved and look into the overlooked. Well, I went to Ohio recently, and Newark is like 30 minutes from Columbus. It's where they found these things. So I shot a video. And the video, I explain the issues, break it down, and in the context of doing the video, I did a lot of research. And I knew that I also had to go about an hour more to a place called Coshocton County. And over there in Coshocton is where the Newark Holy Stones are actually housed. The Newark Holy Stones are still used as evidence by One West Hebrew Israelites and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to talk about this idea that in some way ancient Hebrews were in ancient America. Now, that wasn't really what they were trying to accomplish, it seems, back then. As far as Mormonism or Hebrew Israelism, it seems like the fraud was done for different reasons, and we'll get to that. But nonetheless, it was perpetrated there in the 19th century. And it still has relevance today. They're still on display in the museum there that I visited. Here's Tyrone Hakadasha, and he says, I've been told you Mississippi is the land of Yasharallah. So Tyrone has been on the show before, and he has his own theory. He believes that ancient Israel is actually in modern-day Mississippi. Just not a lot of people know that, and Tyrone wants to let people know, so he's on the live chat letting us know. So I think he would probably be someone who would buy into some understanding of these holy stones, as it were. Okay, so I'm gonna make a couple changes here on the screen. Well, you know what? Let me do it a different way. Here. So listen, while I'm getting a few things set up, will you guys please like this video? Will you please share this video? And will you make sure that you are subscribed to this channel? Or if you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. Here's what we're going to talk about today, by God's grace, if we can get to all this before church service tonight, for those who had midweek Bible study. Okay. Hebrew in Ohio, not just Hebrew on the stones, but the idea of Hebrews in Ohio, and the stones would be viewed as evidence by some. And so that's what we're going to talk about, these ancient artifacts as they're purported to be. Okay, so first thing is, these ancient earthworks, there are some in the United States, mainly Native Americans who were mound builders. Now, when Americans first started finding these things, they said, what's going on with these mounds? Some people try to say they were basically Israelite temples. Some people said it was Atlanteans, Egyptians. There's all kinds of theories put forth about who the mound builders would be. Now, I would say it's kind of obvious. Let's just use Occam's razor. Why not the Hopewell Native Americans? You know, the people right there who are around a number of these mounds in Ohio and Indiana. But a lot of people basically said, well, the Native Americans are probably too primitive, so it had to be somebody else. Now, that aspect of it is not considered cool to say anymore. And so people have different theories about this that they still promote, although they usually don't include that aspect. So we're going to talk about how these holy stones are found. One's called the keystone, and the other one's called the Decalogue stone, and they're going to be discovered by a man named David Wyrick. But it comes to light that they're frauds, especially the first one. It is incredibly obvious it's a fraud. And so the question is, who faked the stones and why? Talk about the motives and methods, because this was discovered in 1860, so who did this and why? And I talk about some of the bizarre beliefs behind the myths, such as the Mound Builder myth, the Lost Tribes myths, and other white supremacist fantasies. And then, unfortunately, you have the History Channel keep eating alive in their show America and Earth, and then Glenn Beck also revived this bad archaeology. And Israelites and Mormons, some of them anyway, still use this hoax. You know, they cite these forged artifacts as proof of whatever their theories are. But Cyrus Thomas, he's going to be important, and he represents the archaeological consensus here. Basically says that these mounds represent indigenous genius. And listen, the gospel doesn't need fake stones. Scripture speaks against clever myths and forged relics. And so we're going to reiterate this idea that fake stones are inferior to the Rock of Ages. That's Jesus, all right? Now, I see Abu's here. Abu, I want to get you, if you're able to translate some of this Hebrew. Plain says, good Lord, who is this Tyrone cat? I know you think he's probably joking, but I've had him on the show before. Plain, he's not joking. He's dead serious. And so I actually have replicas of the artifacts that I have bought. So I'm actually going to show you them. And so when you see the thumbnail, basically I'm holding what I'm really holding. You understand? So it's a very interesting thing that you can buy replicas of fake artifacts in 2025. So we're going to title this episode, Fake Stones and Fabricated Tribes, the Newark Holy Stones Hoax Exposed. Did Israelites build America's burial mounds? Well, let's talk about that. Let's get into this, and I'm very excited that you are here today. This is definitely niche apologetics, no doubt about that. This is niche apologetics, but it's important stuff to cover nonetheless. And we are literally talking about a theory that would involve Hebrew prophets walking the Ohio Valley. There are people who basically, really, literally believe that. But these Newark Holy Stones that were unearthed in Newark, Ohio, there's two of them in somewhat different locations, 5 months apart. They are 19th century frauds. So today we're going to try to set their record straight here. Now, we start off with a man named David Wyrick. He's a surveyor. For a long time, he was basically blamed as the culprit behind this. But the more I've looked into this, I don't think he had the capacity or capability to fake these, although he did unearth two of these carved stones in Newark, Ohio. And supposedly, they contained Hebrew inscriptions. Now, they really did contain Hebrew inscriptions. The question is, when were these made? Who made them? You understand? So one is called the Decalogue stone. That's the second one that was found, and it's supposed to actually have a figure of Moses in it, as well as the Ten Commandments in Hebrew around it. The other one is the keystone, and that one's the first one, and it's received a lot of criticism. And so it appears that the forgers basically came up with a replacement. It's like they were trying to prove their homework that they were cheating on. So people did use this find to make all kinds of claims. Now, was it the academic consensus? No. But would some people use it? They would say things like, well, look, it looks like back in the day, the ancient Jews had colonized America. And so in some way, they would link the Hopewell Mound builders to the lost tribes of Israel. The Mormons would do that with their Lamanite thesis. But some people would say, well, hey, it looks like the Hopewell Mound builders stole this land from ancient Jews, so it's okay now if we kick them out. You understand? Something along those lines. Yeah, Tyrone, we do have a rule here. If you could not do all caps, please. Thank you. Now, there are some suspicious elements about this from jump. One is the same person discovered both of these, okay? The same person. 5 weeks apart and just a few miles within each other. And the second was discovered after the first had already been dismissed as anachronistic, meaning out of time. It'd be like digging in the Jurassic era and finding an iPhone. You know that it doesn't belong there. It's not natural or organic to that time. Using modern understandings of any variety of time scale. So what's the problem with the first stone, the keystone? Well, it's that it uses a modern form of Hebrew. From the 1800s, it's basically typeset Hebrew. Now, obviously, if this thing is thousands of years old, well, then there's a problem if it's Hebrew that you would find on a typeset from the 1800s. That's a good time for me to show you the keystone. So these weren't exactly cheap, but I'll bust the first one out here. Behold the keystone. This is it right here, kids. Shout out to Lewis, the brother. It was great to see you recently in Ohio. And when I wasn't with you, this is some of the other stuff I was doing. And I'm going to tell you what these mean because I've already got this kind of mapped out here. I'm going to show you each one of these. Okay, you gotta read it right to left, of course, but I'm just going to hold it as it is. This right here is supposed to say, and it's going to be hard to do, and I'm not going to zoom in on it, but it's supposed to say Holy of Holies. Well, it does say Holy of Holies. And I'm going to show you a sort of a picture of it so you can get the idea. Okay. Now, the problem is with this is that, oops, I just had it upside down. The problem is with this is that you have modern Hebrew. This is from the 1800s, so this is what you would see like in a Hebrew Bible that was printed. So it's like, this is supposed to be an ancient object. Well, how is that the case if what you have on it is modern Hebrew? And people immediately recognized this problem. This was immediately something that was recognized. And again, you're not really going to be able to make real good sense of this. I'll try to take some close-up pictures later. But when I put it like that, you can kind of get a better sense. This says King of the Earth. Ah, there, Abu. He's, yeah, sorry, I had it upside down at first. Abu is in the live chat, is recognizing some things he saw. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, on the other side, I'm going to show you, this is going to say the word of the Lord. Now, it really does say these things I'm showing you. It really does say these things, okay? This right here, okay, says the word of the Lord. I'm holding it the way it's kind of presented, which is like this. It's on the side here. And then, lastly, the back side says the laws of Jehovah. The laws of Jehovah, or the laws of Yahweh. Here, can you see it more like that? So you see, oh, there we go. That's better. So what you have is, you have it inscribed on 4 different sides there on this keystone. And again, this is a replica of the keystone. Now, this was found in June, I believe was the date, 1860. Yeah, June of 1860. And so this book I have shows the representation of the 4 sides. I'm just going to hold it the way it is in the book. And it includes a translation of it. All right, you see, this is a book you can pick up that talks about it. This is an old reprint, and you can get it right there at the library, at the museum, I'm sorry. And you have these 4 sides of this keystone. It was found on June 29th, 1860, in a sink or a depression, meaning it went down, not like a sink, but something that sink, understand? And there was these, as it's described, commonly denominated as well holes. And they were looking for human bones, supposedly, but they didn't find that. This is a description of what some people say. Now, there's all kinds of stories about the finding of these things, and a lot of them, there are some contradictory here. And you got these 4 things it says: King of Earth, Lord of the Lord, laws of Yahweh, and Holy of Holies. Okay, so that's that. Now let's talk a little bit about this keystone, okay? Because you have a situation where people immediately recognize, well, that's modern Hebrew. So most people understood this is fake, this is fraudulent. Most people understood it pretty early there, okay? It wasn't something that was really debated, to be honest. And so people, they could recognize this is like something that a seminarian, for example, could easily have access to. And if they're trained like a lot of ministers at that time would be in basic Hebrew, they would have been able to make heads or tails of this, translate it as was later, but they would also be able to write this out. And it was almost like typeset directly to it. Yeah. So it's like, well, okay, this thing exists, but the problem is this Hebrew that's on here is definitely not ancient. And so at the top of this, hold on, I'm gonna try this. I got a book on here. I'm gonna look through this a little bit. Okay, this is the book, Newark Holy Stones: History of an Archaeological Tragedy, by Robert Altrues, and he talks about a number of people involved in this very fascinating cast of characters that are involved in this. And as I mentioned, the person who discovered them, David Wyrick, he was a surveyor, and he actually did some decent surveying work, apparently. This is his work from 1860. So he really, in the Newark earthworks, did some surveying work and did some decent work in that area. And so he was sort of an amateur archaeologist, but not a professional. But then again, the field itself was still developing. So they took this to a number of people, such as Professor Cooper of Danville. He was inclined to think that the lettering was more modern. That's an example. They also reported this in the Cincinnati Daily Commercial, July 10th, 1860. And then you had some other people involved, such as J.J. Benjamin, and he, by some, was considered the best Hebrew scholar in the country at the time. And here's what he said. This is fascinating. He said, moreover, this is a quote from Bickham, 1860. Listen to this. He said, moreover, this is J.J. Benjamin, a Hebrew scholar, that he is a Mason, and he thinks it's likely that the keystone has some relation to the order, because apparently the keystone is a common Masonic symbol, and so that's what he noted right away. So this is damning to the idea of them being ancient, the modern Hebrew, and the fact that you've got the situation with the fact that it's a Masonic symbol. So then July 10th, you had the Daily Gazette say this: the Holy Stone is an unmitigated hoax. The Hebrew characters used in this inscription are modern, having been known only about 250 years. Had the author of this trick been better informed, he would undoubtedly have selected the ancient characters, making his device at least a temporary puzzle. His selection of the modern style has spared the world the excitement of even 9 days' wonder. That's an anonymous from the opposition newspaper to the Cincinnati Daily Commercial, which is called the Daily Gazette. This is how people communicated back then, newspapers. And so they recognized right away that there's a massive problem here, that the Hebrew lettering is a hoax, because the Hebrew lettering is modern. Now, this is interesting. I don't think David Wyrick was the one who did it, because he expressed multiple doubts about the stones himself. It seems he wanted them to be true, but he would say he wasn't always sure. I'm going to read from this book here. This is a very good scholarly little monograph on the topic. And it says this: with respect to Thomas D. Jones, Wyrick states that there existed a rumor in Cincinnati that Jones had made and buried the keystone. This, he said, so this is a quote from Wyrick, quite unhinged me for exhibition. So they were going to be on an exhibition, and Wyrick is unsettled. Quote, for I could not feel justified in offering a thing as ancient while really the maker resided among us, end quote. I don't think Wyrick, even though he found both of them, was the person who forged them, because it doesn't make sense for him to say things like that. Plus, when he went and made the replications of this for the paper, he didn't get the Hebrew right. Even worse than the Hebrew on, and I just showed the Decalogue stone there, and his portrayal of the Moses character was also inferior, meaning he couldn't reproduce it, it appears, on the booklets he made. Now, listen to this. Here's what Jones says, though. So there's lots of rumors even at the time. Jones himself in 1860 said, the one who Wyrick was worried was the person who perpetrated the fraud, quote, it looks too fresh in color to have lain long in the earth without materially changing its complexion. Hence, we conclude it is quite of a modern origin and execution. So, do you understand that everyone is like, this thing is fake? So, then you have the New York Times received a letter from D. Francis Bacon, and here's what he says. In his letter, he dwells upon the lack of other Hebraic remains in the New World, and that's a big important fact. And the fact that the stone didn't really show evidence of weathering, and he claims that this occurs whenever you have it laying there for centuries. And so here's what D. Francis Bacon says in his letter to the New York Times. Indeed, from all that we can gather both from private and published sources, we must classify it thus. genus bug species hum. And so he's making a joke there. And then he says, belonging to the same category as the golden plates of the Mormon Bible. Fascinating, right? Now, Wyrick later on in the Cincinnati Daily Commercial, August 3rd, he wrote a letter to the editor, and he said that he was worried that Jones is the one who manufactured the stone. He, quote, had a strong inclination that it might possibly be true, for I really had my fears from the time of discovery of such having been the case, its having been deposited years ago for a hoax. So Wyrick himself, the person who discovered it, was concerned. Now there's a picture of Thomas Jones, who Wyrick was worried did it, but it doesn't make sense because Wyrick himself said, nah, not so much. Now, you also have someone involved, the Reverend John Merrick. He's from Paris, Kentucky, and he wrote a letter to the American Oriental Society dated September 17, 1860. So this is all within this time frame. And here's what he said. It carries... well, let me read the whole thing. Indeed, you will see by the photographed and traced copies of it herewith forwarded to your addresses that it carries its condemnation on its face as a bungling imitation of the printed Chaldee letters in our later editions of the Hebrew Bible. So they all recognized it was basically the same thing that was typeset. So it would be like this. If you found an ancient artifact in America and it was written with something using Helvetica typeface, you'd be like, well, that's clearly not ancient. Understand? Now, they had proceedings of a meeting there, October 17th and 1860, at the American Oriental Society, and they passed around these materials from Reverend Merrick, and here's the consensus of the room according to Merrick, 1860. No person was found disposed to differ from the opinion expressed by that gentleman, while some surprise was manifested that so transparent a fraud or piece of pleasantry should have made so much stir and deceived so many people. So do you see that even in its time, it was almost immediately viewed as a fraud? This keystone. Now notice there are two stones under question, but I've only shown one. Understand? And real quick, I'm just going to bring up a book that I also picked up at the Johnson Humrick House Museum in Coshocton, Ohio. More like a booklet. These are like academic materials. This is from the Montgomery Foundation. Old Questions, New Science, Reinterpreting Native American Origins in Light of Modern Methods and Technology, Public Symposium, Saturday, April 25th, 2009. This one has to do with DNA and things like that, so I'm not necessarily going to be getting into that on this. But here's another great one, Civilizations Lost and Found, by Feder, Lepper, Barnhart, and Bolnick. And it was originally published in the Skeptical Inquirer. And this is a really good, helpful article as well. I definitely recommend it to you. You can find it, but some of this stuff is difficult to find unless you go to the museum itself. But nonetheless, here we are talking about, and I went to the museum, I went to the Newark Earthworks, and I also went to the Coshocton Johnson Museum about an hour away, which house. Now, what are the Newark Earthworks? They're spectacular. It's an array of more than 4.5 square miles of geometric enclosures and mounds in a variety of shapes and sizes. Pretty cool. And what's interesting is there's no evidence, archaeologically speaking, for an urban population there or any of these monumental earthworks of the Hopewell culture. So we don't really fully know what they are or what's going on with them, but we do know that they exist. And here's some of the octagon earthworks. They're quite elaborate. They'll build probably 100 to 100 years before Christ. 100 years before Christ up to about 400 years after Christ. Around that time is when they're usually dated. And they include a sophisticated knowledge of geometry and astronomy in their form and alignments. And these holy stones are found just east of the octagonal enclosure that we're talking about. And so there are other things like this that have been supposedly found throughout history. And other examples are the Michigan relics, the Grave Creek Stone, the Bat Creek Stone, and of course here we are talking about the Newark Holy Stones. One thing that's interesting here is that after the 19th century is over, you don't have these kinds of discoveries being made anymore. Now, that just doesn't make any sense, meaning if they're real, why would we cease to be finding these things? And also, why haven't we found other things that would correspond, such as Hebrew societies or something like that? You understand? But we don't find that. So that's a massive problem there. Do you understand? It shows it was part of the time and basically lack of knowledge. So this one is found first, and then 5 months later at a different site a few miles south of Newark, you have the second one found. And in this situation, it's found around what's called the Reservoir Stone Mound, specifically of the Newark earthworks from the Jacksontown Stone Mound, 40 feet in height, 180 feet diameter, and a lot of this was destroyed 1831, 1832, because they took the stones and they used them in construction for a dike in the area. They had to frame the reservoir on the licking summit of the Ohio and Erie Canal, and they may have removed 10 to 15,000 wagon loads of stone, is what's surmised and estimated there. And so during this time is where these were found. And here's an ancient American magazine, what they say. Wayne May, he's someone who promotes these ideas, and I'm not going to read everything he says, but basically this is a good piece because what it does is it takes these presentations apart for people who promote this, and they do a really good job about this. And I'm going to get into that a little bit when I get into the Decalogue stone, which I've talked a little bit about. And so we have 2 stones, but actually there's even more than that, because I know you can't see it fully, but see, here's the keystone, and then here's the Decalogue stone, which I'm going to show you. But the Decalogue stone comes with this little bowl and essentially a carrying case. It's kind of a little case here that was sealed with kind of a white, almost like cement. That is, the seal was broken when they opened it up. A very fascinating thing there. Very fascinating indeed. And it's crazy that in 1991, these artifacts, because they are a certain kind of artifact, they were in the desk. And they moved them out of the desk and gave them their exhibition case in the CASHAPP museum there, which I visited. And so now you can actually see them. And I'm going to have a documentary video coming out very soon about this. Now, people who promote this, even if they're not described as LDS or Hebrew Israelites, sometimes the term used for them is called diffusionists. Diffusionists. These are people who support this notion that there were fundamental aspects of Native American culture that are influenced by pre-Columbian visitors. And so they get called diffusionists. And in contrast, those who see Native American cultures developing largely independent of outside influences, they're called isolationists. And so that's kind of the way the debate and the discussion is divided into. And, you know, we do have evidence that the Norse came and visited. There is evidence, and this is probably the 10th century AD. They left artifacts in northeastern Canada and Newfoundland. So this is not impossible, this kind of thing, but you need better evidence than what we have here. Now, there are some proponents of this, but the people who are proponents, you got a professor of biology, and then you also have a professor of economics at Ohio State University, McCullough and Al Roots. Those are some of the people who promoted these things. And so that's kind of a problem. That's kind of a problem. Now, listen to what Wyrick says about these stones. This is the person who discovered them. He says he had a fear, quote, that someone has been trying to hoax me, especially as my opinions have been strong and firmly held. That's a letter dated April 13th, 1863. So that's later on. And so some people argue, well, these are too elaborate. They're too elaborate to be a hoax. And there are a lot of political things going on at the time, which we're going to get to in later. But that argument isn't quite true, that they're too elaborate to be a hoax, because there are lots of reasons you could want to do this. And we're going to talk a little bit about that towards the end here. Let me take a look at the live chat here. What's up, Red? Thank you for the super chat, my man. Red, how you doing, brother? Thank you for the super chat. And let's see here. What's up, brother Garfield? How you doing? What's up, all things? What's up, Ham Sunshine? What's up, Leaf? It was great to see you. It was great to see you at the conference, my friend. Yeah, I agree, Abu, but there are people who do argue that way. This is actually a common argument you'll get into. Why would someone go to all this trouble, is what they'll say. You know, they'll say this just doesn't make sense. But that's not a very good argument. I agree 100%. And there's reasons that they could want to do this. Okay, so now I'm trying to see which things here I'm going to look at here. I feel like I talked a lot about the keystone enough, and I hope that people understand the problems with the keystone. Here, let me read one thing from an article. This is the final thing I'm going to say about the keystone. This is from McCullough, who actually he is someone who holds that there could be some relevance to these. So I'm going to read what he says, which is interesting. So this thing is 12 to 14 inches here, and it's found by this octagon mound. And it's got these four brief phrases written on the four flat sides, and it's pretty easily legible Hebrew letters that you can see. And he tries to actually figure out what it would be, you know what I mean, like what it would be used for, this guy right here. But here's what he writes about it. Taken by itself and at face value, the keystone could be either ancient or some kind of an early 19th century pioneer artifact, perhaps Masonic. So notice he's open to this, and yet he still says, well, this could be a Masonic artifact. The depression it was found in was surely ancient, but objects can fall into a depression any time after it is dug. Now, part of what people said is, hey, you know what? This is not down deep enough. So he disagrees with some of that, and he thinks that their better case can be made for the Decalogue stone, I think, is the way that he looks at it. And what it appears is that the Decalogue stone was made to basically answer the questions of charges of fraud in relationship to the first stone, the keystone. That seems like that's the way he was approaching it. So let me play our song again. To those who came in late, I want you guys to hear the song, and then I'll be right back with what I'm calling Chapter 3 of today's show. Who faked the stones and why? This is where it really gets interesting. And don't worry, I'm going to also show you the Decalogue stone. Don't worry, we're going to show you that. But first, right now, we're going to talk about who faked the stones and why. But first, let's play this song and then come right back. Does that sound like a good plan, guys? I'll be right back here on Street Apologists Live. In the meantime, hang out, talk to each other.
Take down, David, Warwick, Hopewell Indian Mounds. Discovered in the 1800s, but a dunderhead blundered. Check the Hebrew text, and I wondered, why is it written in the modern block script? Newark Stones, the topic fraudulent. The optics prove that it's a fraud hoax. You need to stop it, drop it, nope. If it's a fact, then I ask the obvious. Why is the stone so known as a key? Common Masonic imagery for their degrees. Even Hebrew experts in 1860 agreed the holy keystone is a fake forgery. No stone, just leave him alone. No stone, just leave him alone. But then, just then, in about 5 months, a new stone emerged to give you what you want. The Hebrew seemed older, even archaic. The 10 Commandments engraved and displayed it, but somebody done faked it and played it. Prophets were sacred, now I gotta say it. No Jew drew an ancient Hebrew, is quite true. An American made it, take it as it is. It's supposed to be Moses, the local town dentist most likely composed this. No, this hoax is for days. From Ohio I relay this info to you from the museum display. Hey, no stone, just leave him alone. Story is quite the odyssey. All evidence points to a poor forgery designed to prop up the Hebraic native theory. Hear me, the stones bear earmarks of straight trickery. Despite the process, the LDS still confess the stones are for real, they feel they possess proof that natives were white Lamanites. Nope, not right. Yet the Hebrew Israelites remark that it proves their 12 tribes chart. Yet despite facts from scholars of archaeology, Jews don't build big dirt mounds. I speak logically. No stone, just leave them alone. No stone, just leave them alone. The ancient Newark earthworks were built by the indigenous Hopewell people, and the stones were planted there by a 19th century American forger. Visit the dig site and museum that houses the stones and see for yourself. No stone, just leave them alone.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back here, Street Apologists Live. I'm glad to be with you guys. We're talking about the Newark Holy Stones, and I haven't shown you the Decalogue stone, but I'm going to show you the Decalogue stone right now. It's probably a little more interesting. It supposedly has a picture of Moses on it. It's supposed to be Moses here. And if you look all around here, you have the Ten Commandments inscribed in Hebrew, what is supposed to be a more archaic form of Hebrew. However, we're going to have to talk about that and find out what's going on with that. All right. So this is the Decalogue stone. Let me talk a little bit about the Decalogue stone, and then I'm going to talk about maybe who faked these stones and why here. So this Decalogue stone that I'm talking about is a carving of who's supposed to be Moses. How do we know? Because it says Moshe on it. Now, a few things about this. When the Reverend that Wyrick, who discovered these, translated the Hebrew, he first put Mashiach and mistakenly said in his initial draft that this was perhaps Jesus then if it said Mashiach. This is what the Reverend put. A couple of days later, he looked at it and corrected himself and said, oh, that's Moshe. Now, the reason why he had some trouble with it is because the Hebrew is its own thing. Now, I'll just cut to the chase. It looks like the Hebrew was someone trying to imitate ancient Hebrew, but only having access to modern Hebrew. So there's up to 38 by some counts what are called transposition mistakes. Because the question is, these mistakes form a pattern. Now, this gets more technical than I can get into, but there's a podcast on this where a Hebrew expert by the first name of Jeff, I forgot the brother's last name. Well, I don't know if he's a brother. I'm just calling him that. The gentleman's last name. And he explains this in greater detail. I feel like Abu would find this especially interesting because the source of the error showed that it's someone trying to imitate ancient Hebrew but having limited materials. And so the letters that they get wrong are an insight in how they came to this. Here I've got Leaf of Divine Eternal. Thank you for the super chat, brother, and it was great to meet you. He says, heard you got called Post Malone by the Hebrew Israelites in African. Have you been White Iverson himself the whole time? Yeah, I was Vocab Malone way before there was a Post Malone, but now it just, I guess, is how it works. Oh, hey, C. And hey, who else have I not said hi to? Dinu and Nate. The dopest mods, holding it down. I think I've given a shout out to most of the people. Oh, Maurice. There you go, Maurice. Okay. Okay, so there we go. Let's talk about this Decalogue stone now. This is the second event here in the story. And there's a whole bunch of mounds there in Licking County, all right? And they were destroyed, like I mentioned. And now this one apparently is discovered actually on someone's farm. And they give the exact place here. And this this booklet I'm reading, Newark Holy Stones, A History of an Archaeological Tragedy. So they tell you exactly, basically where it is. And it's very fascinating in relationship to something called the Great Stone Mound. And again, written, the Great Stone Mound, these are earthworks made by the Hopewell Indians, but some people thought, well, who were these really made by? And they would come up with something else. Now, here is a sectional view of the clay mound. This is drawn by David Wyrick. He's the man who discovered them, and it's published by B. Lossing. And I'm going to show you what he says these things are. So he's trying to show you where he found these things. Now, what's interesting here about this is when the first one was found, the keystone, and this is the keystone. I know I've shown it a lot more, but here's the keystone. When the first one was found, this, by the way, the keystone is not found there, so I shouldn't confuse you. He just apparently had a son with him who was like 12 years old or something. And that is something else that leads a lot of people to believe is yet another reason that he was not the perpetrator of this hoax, but essentially was a useful idiot in the scenario. Number one, when he reproduced the images for some booklets he made out of it, they were inferior in quality to the stone themselves, which makes no sense because it's easier material to work with. Now, this doesn't mean he was a bad surveyor. It appears he was a decent surveyor, but he was an amateur archaeologist and wanted to believe this, but he publicly expressed doubts about these things that he had found. And if you're going out there, you know, you're not going to just take your 12-year-old son, most likely. And so that's one thing that people consider about this. Now, the second time he went, when he found the Decalogue stone 5 months later, that time he did have a team with him. And there are reports. Now, the thing is, they're conflicting. Some of the reports indicate that some people in the team were telling him where to dig and instructing him where to dig. If those reports from the people who were there are true, then that means they're essentially saying, over there, David, a little bit to the left, David, meaning they would know where these things are. Now, they were planted much better, as I'm going to show you here. And he believes they were found in a coffin. Local people made fun of this and said it was just a feeding trough. See, it's deeper down in there. It seems like it's trying to answer the problems of the original one, because it wasn't just that the keystone was Masonic symbol. It wasn't just that it was modern Hebrew, but it's also that it was not that deep. And there was no one really there to witness it with him other than a son. So it appears that this answered the problems of this. Do you see what I'm saying? And it looks like it took about 5 months to make. And it's possible that someone on the team or multiple people on the team could have been involved with the hoax using David Wyrick essentially as their fall guy. Now, here's how he describes it when he found it. An upper part of the clay mound, and B, the lower portion. In these, the open dots indicate places where it was evident timbers had been placed and had rotted away. C, the arch of the stone. He has these labeled in the diagram. 111. One indicating, so he understands how to do these things. He's applying his surveying skills to this. Indicating 2 layers of small stones from 6 to 10 inches in diameter and a 2-layer of broad flat stones. D, the coffin and skeleton, and E, the cavity filled with water in which they rested. The clay had evidently been formed into a kind of mortar and was as hard as sun-dried brick. So that's how he describes where he found that one. Okay, so the thing is, though, because this it generated a lot of excitement, but was cast down even by people of the day as a fake pretty quickly. The problem was, even though this was a much better forgery, it didn't generate as much excitement as the predecessor, because they're like, well, the first one is a hoax, man. You understand what I'm saying? So this is in November that he found this one, the Decalogue stone. And here's what was said later. Whittlesey, who was an expert in these matters himself, says that Dr. Nichols is quite a shady figure in all this. He seems to be the least liked person in all this. People seem to like Wyrick, but they seem to basically make fun of him. And Dr. Nichols seemed to be somebody that nobody liked or trusted. And here's what Dr. Nichols, who was with Wyrick at the time of discovery, this is in relationship to the Decalogue stone, discredited the antiquity of the inscribed stone and the box and stated that Wyrick had been there alone before he invited the party to go with him. Now, what's weird is Nichols seems to discount these, but yet later 2 more holy stones were found in the Newark area after Wyrick had died. Now, some reports he committed suicide. Other reports are that it's an accidental overdose. We don't know. Either way, Wyrick was destitute, it appears, when he died. And his life was quite tragic in that regard. After he dies, Nichols is involved with the finding of 2 more. And one of them, he says, oh, that is a hoax. That's a hoax that we perpetrated to discredit the earlier ones. So it's very confusing. And he was a dentist, so he may have had some ability to do this. Yeah, Brother Garfield was mentioning Reverend McCarty, who I've mentioned briefly. He's the one who did the translation. Some people say that he's the one who did it. I am not as convinced that McCarty was the one who is the person behind this, because it doesn't make sense that he had to correct his own Hebrew translation after he put it out, because he put it out relatively quick, within a day or two, but that's not impossible for someone who knew Hebrew, especially when it's pretty obvious that it's supposed to be the 10 Commandments, once it became obvious. But he originally thought it said Mashiach, or basically that Messiah instead of Moshe. So why would he make that mistake and then put it back out? You understand what I'm saying? So it seems like it's a we, not just a he. So I'm not sure if Reverend McCarty did it, because he's the one who provided that initial translation, and his mistakes don't make sense if he knew about it. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, now we look at the Decalogue stone, and it's got this box that was sealed. We no longer have access to the seal, so there's no testing of the little sealant that can be done. And sometimes people say, well, why would you give it this seal in this box if it's just a fraud? See, that could be part of the fraud in order to give you the idea that it hadn't been tampered with. Do you understand? Now, here's where the story does get interesting. Notice I've been trying to vindicate Wyrick the whole time, saying I don't think that he's a person who perpetrated the hoax. However, Whittlesey, who in general was considered reliable, wrote this in 1872. Now, this is a while afterwards. He did point to Wyrick as the perpetrator, because here's what he says. Not long after this, he died, and in his private room, among the valuable relics he had so zealously collected, a Hebrew Bible was found, which fully cleared up the mystery of the Hebrew inscription. Now, this is a decade later or so, but what reports indicate that they found in Wyrick's room were attempted carvings on a slate of a woodcut of a priest. Meaning, practice or the original of this is what people were saying. But see, some of these stories are later, and so some people say these look unverified. So there's some challenging things to this. Now listen to this. You have McCarty, who was supposed to meet somebody, the colonel, they're calling him, in his office, and here's what it says that McCarty said to Colonel when they were gonna meet about this in 1867. McCarty was quite sad about this. Dr. McCarty appeared in the Colonel's Cleveland office with a strange burden and a mournful countenance. When asked if he had found the needed materials, so they had looked, through Wyrick's stuff. He said there was no longer any need for them. Then he explained, this is McCarty, this is the one who translated it initially, that while searching, he had found an old Hebrew Bible. The book almost turned itself to a page that reproduced the 10 Commandments in Hebrew characters. The page was so thumbed and worn that Dr. McCarty felt only one conclusion could be drawn. So what they're saying is, well, it looks like Wyrick forged these things, because it's the Hebrew Bible's page is the most used page in this, and you have these woodcuts. The second piece of evidence was a chest which contained a variety of stone-cutting tools, along with fragments of the same black rock as the Holy Stone. And on some of the fragments was practice carving similar to that on the Discovery Stone. Whittlesey was horrified but convinced. The stones had surely been a gigantic hoax. He did write his article about Wyrick, but he titled it Archaeological Frauds. Those who had believed in the stones because of his stout championship of them were now convinced, as he was, that he had been fooled. So, because originally Whittlesey said that these might be real. And Whittlesey had somewhat of a good reputation in this area. And there's a really strange element to the story. When Whittlesey just happened to be visiting town is the same time that they discovered the stone. So they could take him to him. And Charles Whittlesey, this is him, initially did not just discount them initially. He's right there. The bald gentleman over here on the bottom page. Not the one in the box, but the other one over here. And so that's a picture from Charles Whittlesey from 1896. But then later on he says, you know what, I don't think so. However, there are potentially other explanations for these materials in Wyrick's room. It's possible that what he could have been doing is making this stuff for the pamphlet he was going to make, because he did prepare a pamphlet. So it could have been for that, meaning after the fact, not before the fact. But see, the problem, you see how the evidence could go either way in regards to Wyrick? This is why no one really knows who did this. No one really knows who did this. Now, they have some materials for Whittlesey that are collected later, and the scholar went through them. And Whittlesey had a copy of Wyrick's small pamphlet, and on the cover of this, between the words "two stones," Whittlesey had penciled the word "bogus." Now, that's very fascinating. So you see how this is a very fascinating, confusing story, because it does not have to be that Wyrick necessarily is the perpetrator of a fraud, even though those materials were there, because they're all alternative explanations. Now, notice I mentioned that there was later on found two other things. One is called the inscribed head. Now, the problem is this inscribed head with apparently Hebrew characters, it no longer exists. We only have these images of it. It no longer exists. We don't have it anymore. Do you understand? So that's the problem. And these were frauds perpetrated by John Nickel, who poo-pooed the Decalogue and the keystone, but then he admitted later on that he did the head and the copper stone, or the Cooper stone. That's another one that is relevant to the Cooper stone. What's crazy is sometimes people still use these. Now, we also don't have this. We just have lithographs of it, the Cooper stone. And so he perpetrated these. So you have 4 frauds coming out of Newark. It started to get a bad reputation. And this is just crazy, crazy stuff. Okay. This is just crazy stuff. There's a bunch of rabbis who get involved at various points where they take this to different rabbis. There's a point where a guy named Bradner is involved. He's an interesting fellow. In Roe Bradner Jr., he's a physician at the Philadelphia State Hospital for the Insane at Philadelphia. And he's writing letters, such as one dated in July 25th, 1873. And here's what he says. And as he continued to seek support for displaying these, there's an expedition of these stones, and it stirred up responses. And one of these, the April 11th Science, contains this note. A correspondent from Newark, Ohio, warns us that any inscribed stones said to originate from the locality may be looked upon as certainly spurious. Years ago, certain parties in that place, they're talking about Newark, it became known as a place where frauds came out of, made a business of manufacturing and burying inscribed stones and other objects in the autumn and exhuming them the following spring in the presence of innocent witnesses. So this is from an article of Science way back in 1884. This is 20-some years after the discovery of these things. And Newark has this reputation. And they're saying, hey, you should ignore this. Some of the parties to these frauds afterwards confessed to them, such as Nichols, the dentist, and no such objects, excepting such as were spurious, have ever been known from that region. The person who's writing this note to Science, the magazine, is saying, look, everything that we've got out of there, it's fraudulent, so you probably shouldn't believe it. Isn't it something else, right? Do you hear this? Now, here, these stones, and they really produced an intensive level of study, even during the decade after their discovery. And a problem that was noticed is that they contained a lack of a patina of age. That means they didn't look old as they should have. It's not just the Hebrew script, it's the stones themselves. Now, this is from the New York Times, July 27th, 1860. And here you have someone named Dr. Abraham Geiger. And he talked about this, and he examined the photographs, the inscriptions, and here's what he says, quote, "They were the bungling work of an unskilled stonemason, and the strangeness of some letters," talking about the Hebrew, "as well as the many mistakes and transpositions was his fault. The letters are not antique. This is not a relic of hoary antiquity, nor is it of a historical critical value for the Decalogue. I am unable to determine when and for what purpose this work of religious hocus pocus was produced." And really, that's exactly right. And I think that's essentially the modern opinion. Now, Dr. Nichols is a different person in the story that they still don't quite know his involvement, but it's funky, to say the least. Okay, now, here you have Dr. Francis Bacon, who wrote D. Francis Bacon. I'm sorry, I said D. Doctor, but it's just D. Francis Bacon, not the same one you're thinking of. And September 1st, he wrote an article in Harper's Weekly. Listen to what he said. "I know by information derived from a gentleman who has excavated hundreds of the mighty, marvelous, mysterious mounds of the Great Ohio Valley," and then he has a number of things here. He talks about how they exhumed the remains and all that, and here's what they say. "Living or dead, no stone, whether novaculite or anything else, even granite, can be buried in that soil for so much as half a century without becoming covered by a calcareous incrustation or acquiring a ferruginous or other stain from the earth which encloses it. And yet this Newark Holy Stone comes up from its entombment of some thousands, some hundreds, and some odd years, as clean and bright and slick as a new whistle. It is impossible to deceive a practiced eye by any such transparent device as this flimsy, clumsy contrivance presents." Understand? So what's interesting is, even though it doesn't have the marks of age, it does have patination on some of the letters. So here you have in 1975, someone with the last name of Adams observing this and notices that along the two front edges near Moses' waist on here, the letters are patinated, and so they're barely discernible. Why does that matter? It appears the stone had been held in the hand where the fingers created additional wear. The idea is someone is holding it and crafting it and creating it, and there's some evidence there. And in these photo micrographs, you can even see in the first one that it's clearly some kind of metal tool that had been making these, as far as the keystone was concerned. The keystone. So this is a poorer fraud than the Decalogue stone, which was a little bit better. So yeah, problem after problem. Then in 1861, Rabbi Lederer, he wrote, he was someone who edited a magazine called Israelite Indeed. Here's what he said. "To my mind, the writer was not a Jew and an Israelite." Now here's why he says, "My reason for believing the writer not to have been a Jew are these." And he says, first of all, you're not going to have these mistakes because we venerate our scriptures too much. You're not going to have all these mistakes that are found in here. And so there's too many. Here's what he says. This is a quote now. "There are many mistakes in that engraving. Some letters entirely wanting, some transposed, and some superfluous. I conclude the writer was not a Hebrew. The order, or rather disorder, in which the Ten Commandments are engraved, of which we have nothing of a similar kind elsewhere, proves that the author was not a Hebrew. The presence of a human figure, however, is the strongest objection against the supposition that the writer was a Hebrew," saying that ancient Hebrews would not draw pictures. Now, in more recent times, he says they started imitating the Gentiles and that. But at that time, no Hebrew would have dared to carve any human figure. So problem after problem after problem, and I've tried to share some of these problems with you. Now let's talk a little bit about why or who. Notice we don't really know who exactly, but there's one thing that could have been done that perhaps we could say, I guess we might say is like good. Maybe it's like a person had a good reason for doing it. Let me try to find out where it is here. I got it. Just a second. I got to look through my notes here. Okay, where'd it go? Oh man, did I not bring it in here? I might have to just look at my phone here. Yeah, I'll have to look at my phone. Because the question is who? Now, here's what the museum says they have a little display. It appears that the museum used to have a display that was more favorable to it, but now they kind of say, no, I don't think so. So we don't really know for sure who did these. We likely never will. Reverend McCarthy is a suspect. People used to suspect David Wyrick, the discoverer, but less and less these days. Because Reverend McCarthy did know Hebrew, and people feel that he wanted to perpetuate this fraud, and he did translate the stones once found. Because it appears his bishop had earlier said that, hey, what if we could find ancient Hebrew relics in these great earthworks in America? Now, why would somebody want to do that? To avert the Civil War, to show that black folks and Indians were real people. What? Okay, back in the day, the scientific consensus, it appears, was polygenesis. The idea that multiple lines of people had sprung up from various places. And so you had some who were not quite as human as others. So there's no unity of man under this schema. This can be a justification for some for racism. You understand? And so people who mainly it was religious people who were more of the abolitionist type and egalitarians in regards to racial matters, wanted to not only affirm what the scripture said, that it's monogenesis, we all came from Adam and Eve, but also to explain the fact of the reality of the unity of man. You understand? The unity of man. Now, what does that mean? That means that we all came from Adam and Eve and therefore share in humanity bearing the image of God. And here's what's interesting. Guess who, because scholars Lipper and Gill have done research on this, they combed the newspapers at the time to find out their reaction to these stones. The Democrat newspapers, because newspapers would openly lean one way because there would be multiple competing newspapers in locales. The papers ran by Democrats all denied the stones. The papers ran by Republicans all affirmed the stones. That is a fascinating thing. What would that mean? That would mean they see the stones not as evidence that the Native Americans were inferior, because there were some theories that leaned on that element, or that Native Americans were actually Hebrews per se, but that there was some kind of connection there, not the inferior element, that showed the unity of man. Perhaps they were ancestors. Perhaps the Hebrews had visited. And so it gave evidence to monogenesis. So the Republican newspapers, because remember, this is right before the Civil War, 1860. Everybody saw the Civil War looming. And so when people say, why would you go to great lengths to perpetuate the hoax? What if they thought it would avoid a civil war? Now you may say, this is crazy. Listen, this is broke down in some good podcasts on the subject, specifically one called Archaeological Fantasies, but it's very impossible. Now, that's why it could have been a team of people, and even if it wasn't they who did it, they may have interest in wanting to promote it. Now, these days, we don't have that context, and so Hebrew Israelites and Mormons use these to say, look, in some way, Native Americans are Israelites. Now, what about John Nickel? I mentioned the local dentist. He would have had the tools to inscribe the stone, and he apparently is someone who kept urging Wyrick to dig instead of giving up and excavating elsewhere. There's evidence about that. And what's weird is, though, that he poo-pooed the stones once they were found. So that's where the confusion comes in. But later on, as I mentioned, he fabricated, the local dentist John Nickel, 2 additional holy stones. And the Hebrew letters engraved on those, they're missing. But they included the words JHN, translated into Hebrew. Well, what's that? That's his name in Hebrew. The stones had JHN on them. Now, the Newark stones, the first 2 I'm talking about, they don't have that, though. Do you see how it's like something else? So one thing that could have been good about this is it basically said, hey, we're all one. Now, another version of that is not so nice. I've mentioned it a few times, and it has to do with the idea of these Native Americans could not have built these. And so if you can show, hey, maybe the Native Americans did build these, or there's some kind of connection between Hebrews and Native Americans, you're tying everyone in together. But some people said it had to be visitors, basically. Had to be visitors. And so if you actually Google the word mound builder myth, you will find a whole bunch about this. So I have a book called The Mound Builders. published by Ohio University Press by Robert Silverberg. And he talks a little bit about this mound builder myth. And this is not the only book. You can actually find out all about it. And chapter 2 is really kicks off of it. The making of the myth. And so these mounds have been found all over, and some of them are quite impressive. So let me read a little bit about what it says of page 42 here. See what you guys think about this here. This is so this gets into other things as well, but let me just show you what it says here. All right, here. Da-da-da-da. So he gets into what people were saying at the time. Man, there's so much I want to read of this, but here's one. The English astronomer, this is page 41 now. The English astronomer Francis Bailey, accompanying a party of settlers down the Ohio River in 1796, stopped to examine a group of mounds on what is today the West Virginia side of the river, and wrote the first recorded notice of the striking Grave Creek Mound. By the way, there's supposed to be some Hebrew found there too, which had already been discovered and partly excavated by unknown pioneers. The mounds, Bailey wrote, must have been, quote, built by a race of people more enlightened than the present Indians, and at some period of time very far distant, for the present Indians know nothing about their use, nor have they any tradition concerning them, end quote. Now, it does seem true that natives themselves don't know why these were built, but the Egyptians at the time when the pyramids were discovered didn't know much about the pyramids themselves. And so people would talk about this, and they would talk about the ancestors of the Aztecs. Now, this is going south as well, but where did they come from because of their great things that they built? Where did the Aztecs and Incas come from? This is page 42. Did they come from the supposed lost continent of Atlantis? Were they Greeks, Persians, Hindus, Vikings? For that matter, how had the red-skinned savages themselves, the ordinary Indians, even come to America? So the Book of Mormon, if you actually read it, tries to answer these questions. That's what's so fascinating. And it says this, page 72. Let me show you this here, what it says. Opponents of the Mormons have argued for more than a century that Joseph Smith was merely an over-imaginative youth who became carried away by the fiction of the mound builders, and that he may have lifted much of the Book of Mormon from one or more books, unpublished manuscripts of mound builder fables that he had happened to come across. Both sides of the dispute have advanced enormous quantities of evidence to back their charges and claims, and the truth is very much in doubt. What is certain, though, is that Joseph Smith was fascinated by the story of the mound builders, and that he succeeded in founding a major religious creed whose scriptures offer an explanation of how the mounds came into being. The essence of the Mormon beliefs concerning the mounds can be summed up in the words of Orson Pratt, an early Mormon leader who wrote this in 1851. Quote, this is Orson Pratt, LDS leader in 1851. The bold, bad Lamanites, originally white, became dark and dirty. They became wild, savage, and ferocious, seeking by every means the destruction of the prosperous Nephites, against whom they many times arrayed their hosts in battle. The slain, frequently amounting to tens of thousands, were piled together in great heaps and overspread with a thin covering of earth, which will satisfactorily account for those ancient mounds filled with human bones so numerous at the present day, both in North and South America, end quote. So Orson Pratt is saying these large battles described in the Book of Mormon, understand, they explain why these things are built, because they had to bury all their dead. You see? That is literally what he's saying. You guys following this? Isn't this wild? Isn't this wild? There's similar stuff found in Davenport, Iowa, and of course the Bat Creek Stone. So this is something that was rather prominent. And so the mound builder myth also ties into this question about the Newark Holy Stones. And you just see that there's so much here. Now, here's a problem where the History Channel keeps the myth alive in their show, America Unearthed. America Unearthed. They kept this alive. In 2013, they had the Ark of the Covenant episode there at History Channel. And they essentially revived this hoax in popular consensus, all right? And so what it portrays to tell you is that the Decalogue stone, of which I have a replica right here, prove the Israelites brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ohio. Now, the actual museum that houses the real artifact, which is a forgery, but it's an artifact in a sense now, understand? Modern. The Johnson Humrick House Museum and real scholars, they reject this sensationalism. But what's sad is History Channel never interviewed them. So fake history gets a platform. And guess what you find clips of when you go on Hebrew Israelite websites about this issue, or LDS websites about this issue? Clips from the History Channel episode. You understand? No joke. You hear this? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I agree. So this is part of a problem. But guess what? He is not, or I'm sorry, the History Channel is not the only one. Do you know who else on Fox News also perpetrated this hoax? This guy right down here, Glenn Beck. On his program, on Fox News, Glenn Beck spent a considerable amount of time dedicated to this issue. And on his chalkboard and everything else, and showed pictures of this, he purported this. And you can still find Hebrew Israelite shorts, for example, from IUIC. I pulled up a short from their North Dakota camp the other day, which is interesting in itself, right? IUIC, North Dakota. And they are promoting the Glenn Beck clip. They're watching it, saying, look, even Glenn Beck knows. Because the way Hebrew Israelites are the one that's right to use it is to prove, hey, this shows that Gad were actually here. Gad is a tribe of, are all the tribes of Native Americans, supposed to be one of the 12 tribes that they say are proved by their 12 tribes chart. So how crazy is this? That you have Glenn Beck and IUIC promoting the same myth. So you've got Mormons and Hebrew Israelites joined in promoting this myth. This myth of these stones, these Newark Holy Stones, are actually legitimate. That they're not frauds, that they're not fraudulent, that it's not a hoax, that it's really real, that it's really true. And if you poke around the internet long enough, you can find Glenn Beck talking about this. Now, he gets a number of his facts wrong in it. I don't think he's trying to lie. I think he really believes it. Now, last I knew, Glenn Beck, of course, was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it makes sense why he was promoting it. Now, if you go on a lot of these Mormon channels, what you'll usually find them saying is, could it be evidence? That's the way they usually portray it. Just let me get a drink of water here real quick. Yes, yeah, Ham Sunshine Glenn Beck is LDS. Well, last I know, I mean, has Glenn Beck converted to something else? Anybody know that I'm unaware of? If he has, let me know. But last I knew, he was a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and has been for quite some time. And I don't know about him converting, but when he did this at the time, I know he was. So yes, Ham Sunshine Glenn Beck is a Mormon or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But if you just type in Mormon or LDS and Newark Holy Stones, you'll find all kinds of examples of them using this and promoting these ideas. And so you have this strange confluence where you have two groups that would normally oppose each other in all kinds of ways, specifically Hebrew Israelites and Mormons, or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, promoting the same hoax. And so when it comes to this idea of Hebrews in Ohio, the IUIC guys will say, see, the Israelites were in America. And then the Mormons will say, see, the Israelites were in America. So, it's pretty fascinating, isn't it? They use the same hoax to promote their religion. Come on, man. This is a fascinating thing. So even though these stones have been shown to be fraudulent, people still hold these ideas dearly and promote them to varying degrees. Mainly all over YouTube, but I notice how I talked about the History Channel. Now, granted, that was over 10 years ago, but still, this is what you have. Now, Since then, there's been a number of questions about who really built the mounds. Cyrus Thomas came along, and what he did was he essentially surveyed the surveys of the earthworks in 1894. He was a government worker and archaeologist and whatnot. And he said, listen, these works belong to the Indians. And that's really considered the definitive definitive statement on the subject. I'm not saying Cyrus Thomas per se, but I'm saying that sentiment that, look, the mounds belong to the Hopewell Native Americans, and everything else associated with them should be understood as theirs because there's a number of artifacts uncovered there. So when we ask who really built the mounds, it's the Hopewell Native Americans. Now, the trouble is we don't know exactly what all these mounds were for. Some people have considered them burial grounds because there have been skeletons found there. So there's evidence they may be considered sacred in some way. But the problem is there's all kinds of other stuff found in there. And here's a case displaying some of the things that were found. And there's also a theory that says it's basically an ancient landfill that they just wanted to do cool designs to, such as make, for example, on some of them, from the sky, it be looking like a snake. So there's a really cool one. Or the one I was standing in front of in the video that's going to be coming out, a circle. And they're called, the technical name is not just mounds, they call them earthworks. So there's a picture I took while I was there. And it's really cool with the snow over it. I mean, these things are huge, right? So no one knows exactly what they're for. In general, people kind of want to err on the caution side and say, look, it appears they're sacred. So when you're there, you are not allowed to walk on them, for example. And I think that's fine. I understand that. But since we don't really know the ideas, let's be careful, and let's not treat these casually if that's the case. Now, all this calls for a media critique, though, because you have examples where some in the media are promoting it, from Glenn Beck to the History Channel, as authentic. It's not just Hebrew Israelite and Mormon channels. It's on Fox News and the History Channel. But the Skeptical Inquirer says this: Newark Holy Stones are such a classic case of archaeological fraud. John McCullough, Ohio State archaeologist. I'm not sure if he's an archaeologist. He may be incorrectly labeled on this. I'm sorry. I think he's talking about the first one. I got to relook at that one if he's labeled correctly. McCulloch, or is it a different guy? Because there's two similar guys. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm sorry. But the quote's real. The find is clearly a hoax produced by a confluence of religious and white supremacist fantasies. So that's one way to look at it. But see, and I mentioned that in the video, but there's other angles to look at it. Could have been done by people who wanted to promote the unity of man idea. That's the trouble. Various people could have motivations for this as well. Knox pages, the only artifacts found at the Newark Holy Stones dig site, were planted there. Well, they're talking about those ones in specific. But the point is, this is a good time for us to say, okay, we need to be able to critique the media and think deeply. Just because they have a supposed expert, and they never interview the right people, it seems, on these matters. Just because they have a supposed expert, though, and play some scary music and say, everything you know is wrong and all this kind of stuff, doesn't mean that that's really the case. We just really need to be careful about this. Now, you guys want to see some more pictures from this? Here's me at the site. I'm sorry, at the museum inside of the Newark Holy Stones. And the idea there is somewhat of a representative of the Hopewell Native peoples and some other pictures. So I'm showing you I really went there, and this is something I wanted to do for a while. And if you notice, there's moons in the background. Those moons are because it appears that these aligned with the moon, which is wild, the 16 cycles specifically. So it's a complex hallmark of indigenous knowledge, as this sign in front of them says, and it shows you there the cycles that it lines up with, which is really cool. And so this is from the Ohio Historical Society. This is something I took on site. The main axis of Newark's octagon earthworks marks the northernmost rising of the moon. The earthworks include additional alignments to all other key lunar rise and set points in a cycle that takes 18.6 years to complete. Yet the octagon is not an astronomical observatory. Aligning their architecture with cosmic rhythms was one way in which the ancient Native American builders marked these places as sacred. So some of that's interpretive, but these are monumental works of earth, and such a fascinating thing. Nothing to do, though, with Hebrews. Now, is this a lot to take in? I mean, have you ever heard about this? You probably haven't, but if you poke around Hebrew Israelite channels, you will see them promoting these ideas. So, let me show a few other things from the Johnson, from the museum there in CASHAPP, where this is what they say. This is a sign of the Newark Holy Stones, and this is the main sign. It says this: relics of antiquity or scientific forgeries. That's a term that's used in the literature. Discovered during the eventful year of 1860. Why? Because it's right before the Civil War. The Newark Holy Stones are 2 artifacts found in the spring and the fall, both with Hebrew inscriptions. Popular response to the first found the keystone was skeptical. The Decalogue stone, excavated far south of the first, had more unusual Hebrew lettering, which later scholars have identified as rooted in 1800s typography and grammar. And the reason why they say it's rooted is because it's trying to imitate the square script, which is more archaic, but the mistakes show the pattern of transposition from modern Hebrew. You understand? And so that's where we're getting that idea from as far as that problem. And I was on site there, as you can tell. I took these just real quick with my phone. And have you guys find this show fascinating? I hope so. Mikey in New York says, I'm just looking at the devil lie. Mikey, are you referring to me? Because this is my show, so I'm not sure else you'd be looking at. Tell me what you are trying to prove here, because just saying I'm lying, notice how many facts I brought forward. I visited the site. This is not some fly-by-night thing. I'm bringing forward the consensus. There are the actual stones themselves. I was right there. And I've done a significant amount of research on this. So tell me what the lie is. This guy don't know what the hell he's talking about. Way to go, cherry picking, just like you Christians do with the Bible. So that's just invective, Mikey. But are you going to actually give evidence? Witnessing these people's language to be a corrupted form of the Hebrew language, which they couldn't compare to any other race but the Hebrews. Okay, that doesn't make sense. You're not really a clear speaker or thinker here, but I'm trying to work with you, Mikey. So I'm trying to see what you want to say. I'm okay with you bringing up your opinion, but have you really looked into this? Oh, but you blatantly ignore hundreds of aged artifacts and selectively choose what you want. There were plenty of journalists that gagged first-hand encounters with the indigenous of the Americas. Now, the thing is, I know what you're talking about, and they're not journalists, they're explorers, so you just don't know what you're talking about. And this is not meaning that they were Hebrews, just because they had encounters with them. And what they all reported, that's just a lie. They didn't all report that. It's only a few examples of people who think maybe that's what they were reporting. It was unremarkable resemblance to the Hebrew Israelite ways and customs. Yeah, you just don't know what you're talking about. You were just hating and looking for clout. Well, you're on my channel saying this stuff. I'm putting you on. This is a weird way to get clout, if that's what you're saying, because this is something a lot of people aren't interested in or don't know about. So, I'm trying to work with you here, Mikey. And you're referring to journalists. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about explorers. So I don't think you've looked into this as much as maybe you think you have. And it's unfortunate. But I'd love to hear your opinion if you have something that you actually want to say. In fact, I'm going to drop the link here for Garfield to come on. And when he comes on, you could come on too and tell me why you think I'm wrong about this. I would love to hear what you have to say. Just a second here. There's some behind-the-scenes stuff. So let me drop the link here. Mikey, if you want to come on, you can. The link to join. Garfield, if you want to come on, you can, because I know you've looked into this as well, so you'll probably be more informed than our friend. Mikey says, I read books, sir. Okay, cool. Mikey, Have you read any of these books? The Mound Builders by Robert Silverberg, published by Ohio University Press. Or even this, clarified by Arthur McGraw, Presentation of the Two Stones with the characters inscribed upon them. This is a representation of an older book. Or Civilizations Lost and Found. These are specifically about this. These aren't just random encounters by explorers. These are modern day analysis. Or Newark Holy Stones, Context for Controversy from a Public Symposium. Now, maybe you haven't yet, but I would encourage you to read these. This is behind the scenes footage, by the way. I'm just showing it while I'm there. I'm there with Stones. Or this is probably the most helpful of them all. But the question is, have you read those books? I would love for me to see evidence that you have here. Shout out also for the third super chat from Ted East. Thank you very much, Ted. And Garfield, it's your time to come on if you want to. It'd be great to see you come on. So it looks like Hebrewites are just now joining. Just like Ezra says, the Anglo-Saxon people are the actual descendants of Israel. So it's interesting, we have Hebrew Israelites of the One West variety, as well as Anglo-Israelites in the live chat, sometimes called British Israelism as far as their beliefs. No, Anglo-Saxon people are not descendants of ancient Israel. That idea is just as bad as modern-day Hebrew Israelism. It's been debunked, and every time you give evidence, these people give evidence, it's always horrible evidence, such as the Union Jack means the union of Jacob, or Anglo-Saxon means Saxon means Isaac's sons, things like that. It's all wrong, it's all wrong, it's all wrong. Mikey, I did read your comments above, so I did see what you're saying, and you gave no evidence or proof. You just complained. Just like Jay. What is this demon lying about today? Yeah, just like Jay. You guys just have invective. That's all you have. LOL, how do you know what journalist he was talking about? Okay, here's the problem. Journalists as a field didn't exist when he was talking about, because he gave the century in which he was referring to, number one. And I know what he's talking about are accounts of explorers who are writing these things. And how do I know? Because I know what Hebrew Israelites give as their evidence. So that's how I know. Now notice how Mikey never gave any evidence for what he believes. He just says, who are those Jewish people in Israel? So classic diversion tactic. Instead of answering the topic at hand, you want to talk about the Jews in Israel. Well, I'm not going to follow for it, man. Sorry. Jay, something tells me none of those books disprove that natives are a gad, LOL. It's so crazy that you're so trapped up in your belief that you think natives are a gad, LOL. You think that's a LOL statement. The only LOL would be to laugh at you. And look, this is just, we got a lot of crazy people in the chat. Tyrone, we got irrefutable proof Mississippi is the land of Yasharallah. Bro, this is just crazy. Jay, ha ha ha, this guy is a joke. He knows all of the explorers. Notice, all you guys have is insults. You can't give any proof. I'm waiting. Well, at least the Anglo-Israelite is trying to give proof. He says Behistun Rock is archaeological evidence of who the Israelites became. Tell us more. Ted East, they really lean on a Scottish declaration in 1300. Ted East, Viking burial mounds and ancient Hebrew mounds resemble each other. Doesn't mean they're the same people. When you say ancient Hebrew burial mounds, what are you talking about? We don't have evidence that Hebrews built burial mounds. Now, Garfield's not coming on, so listen, Jay, the link is for you as well. I'm going to drop it again. All you do is click on it. It's right there in the live chat. You can jump on, or Mikey, either one of you, or let's even say Ezra, the Anglo-Israelite guy. You could come on as well. Any one of you could come on. Mikey, you're so quick to try to disprove us, the ones that have actual evidence, but you refuse to talk about those who are those Jewish people in Israel? What evidence? I just debunked some of your evidence that you guys give. I'm not so quick. I spent an hour and a half doing it. Mikey, I spent an hour and a half showing you why these are fraudulent. Here, let me run it down for you again. I'm just going to even show you from the museum itself. Now, the museum, if they just wanted to have visitors, they could totally want to promote these things as authentic, because it could be like, hey, look, we got ancient stones. But the museum has scholars associated with it. So they don't want to do that because they know it would destroy their credibility, because it's clear that they are not authentic. So let's first review from the museum's own materials evidence that the keystone, which I hold a replica of in my hand, is a fraud. It was found in a shallow hole. That's a problem. It's easy to place it in there. The Hebrew used in it is from 1800s modern, that would be modern, typography. The shape is associated with Masonic artifacts, not ancient Native American artifacts. Even contemporaries at the time believed it was either a modern artifact or a fraud. Modern artifact means created during that time, recent. William D. Bickham from the Cincinnati Daily Commercial, July 10th, 1860. It was quite possible and even probable that the stone may have been expressly prepared, inscribed, and deposited by some facetious fellow to furnish sport for him at public expense. This is from the museum itself. Have you ever been to the CASHAPP Museum? Have you ever been to the Newark earthworks themselves? If not, have you read books specific to this? If you haven't, I just don't, look, I'll put it this way. I know why you're not clicking the link. Because notice I gave you guys the link, and you guys are all laughing, you Israelites and you Anglo guys, but no one's coming on, but I'm ready for you. What about the Decalogue stone? Wyrick had already found one holy stone a few months back. Many people found it to be very suspect, so now this pops up next. So this seems to be a better forgery that took the critiques of the keystone into account. The stone was found beneath a small burial mound that had been buried under a 40-foot tall stone mound, so it's hidden deeper, understand? Ancient Hebrew typography, but it was written with some mistakes, and the mistakes indicate it was based upon modern Hebrew. That's the pattern of the mistakes in the transposition. The ancient-looking typography, the square script here, was created by someone with knowledge of modern Hebrew, but the carver, who likely knew no Hebrew at all, made mistakes as he engraved the text into stone. So the person who did typography, if it was from a book, they knew Hebrew, but the carver didn't know Hebrew. So it's a better forgery, the Decalogue stone, but it still has too many errors. Now, where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? None of you could talk about this. None of you could defend this. None of you could. I would love for you to come on. I would love for you to try to defend this. I would love, but I know you won't. Now you're going to make excuses for it, aren't you? Yeah, of course you're going to make excuses for it. But let me tell you something, man. God doesn't need fake stones. 2 Peter 1:16 says, we did not follow cleverly devised myths. Now, let's take a look about why these guys are saying they won't come on, even though I've given them multiple chances, including the Anglo-Israelite guy. It's not just the Hebrew Israelites, but the Anglo-Israelite guys, he's invited as well. Ezra, I think your name is. Yeah. So here we go. Here's what they say. Jay says, LOL, no, I'm just poking holes in your faulty logic. You never did any such thing. Come on. Leaf of a Vine Eternal says, Mississippi being called the Promised Land is the funniest thing I've seen today. You're probably right. Mikey says, I'm driving right now. Can't do anything. I'm working a real job, something you don't do. Mikey, if you're driving, why are you typing in a live chat? It would be much easier to talk on a phone because you can just set the phone there while you're driving. Why are you typing? So how is it you're driving and you can type, but you can't? You see it? Lauren, can't answer any questions or show proof. Won't get on live, just whining in the live chat. Jay also, well, he I guess you like that excuse by Mikey. LOL, right, I'm at my job. Yeah, exactly, Lauren. Driving and texting is dangerous. Mikey, you know why they call your people the devil, right? Jay, is this the same account, same person with two different accounts? So this is what it looks like when the devil uses someone as a tool. Very interesting. Is that your normal speaking voice? Are you getting agitated this easily? Jay, bro, no one takes you seriously enough to get on live. Plus, I'm at my job. Say it with me, job. That's right, I work long distance. I have plenty of time to watch YouTube. Wait, What? Jonathan Davis. I'm not even an Israelite, but Vocab is clearly a demon. As hard as he tries, he can't stop God's awakening. Jay, I'm so glad I'm one of the most high chosen people, so I don't look like a complete fool in the eyes of thousands of people. You're just doing emotional fulfillment here. I've yet to see an actual argument for these keyboard warriors. All you guys are doing is saying, LOL, haha, get a job. Oh, by the way, I'm at my job. You can't make this up. It's so funny, Mikey. You guys literally worship a man named Jesus that never existed. Oh, so this is an Old Testament only Hebrews light. Okay. And then Tyrone joins in the fray. I know Hebrew. I can defend Mississippi as the land of Yasharallah. Not one stone will be overturned, dissolve. I know a place. I'll take you there. What's happening? We got Anglo-Israelites, Old Testament only Hebrews light. Everyone's at their job right now. Maybe Tyrone's not. I don't know. Tyrone, are you at work too? I'm sitting here holding these things, and they're just saying I'm a lying devil. Who are the Jews? And this is so funny. Yo. Why aren't more people watching this show? Because they should be looking at this. This is epic. Mikey. Something called text, speech to text, idiot. That fake laughter. Bro was looking foolish, bro. It's genuine laughter. Oh, man. Come on, live chat. Is this funny or not? Give me some skull, dead faces, cry, laugh emojis if you know this is funny. Come on. Come on. Okay. But listen. 2 Peter 1:16, in all seriousness, says, we did not follow cleverly devised myths. And that's exactly what these things are that we've been talking about. Cleverly devised myths. So when we refute this biblically, we've done it historically, and we've already shown that this is all false. We bring up 2 Peter 1:16, first of all, and then I bring up 1 Timothy 4:7. Have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. All right. Amen. 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 Now, I pray that the resources I have shown you have been helpful today. And I believe you're going to enjoy the video that's going to drop. I believe you guys are going to enjoy that. And I think you guys will enjoy this live stream. And I think you're going to enjoy the last song I have. So I created 2 AI songs, essentially with the same lyrics that I wrote, but in 2 different styles. And let's close out the show. And I'm going to put your comments on the screen about this show as I play this. And it's a way to cap all that we've talked about today. I encourage you to look forward to the joint that's going to drop. It's going to be kind of a little mini documentary that I am going to show on this. And I just encourage you guys to subscribe, keep on coming through. I really appreciate you. I'm not a biblical archaeologist proper, but there are some shows we've done on archaeological related issues. So if this is something that you're into, please come check it out, the other stuff. All right. So I'm looking. This next song to me is really great. I pray that you guys dig this AI song I crafted about this specific topic. If you want me to do more of this, let me know. And please support. I really been making a push for the GoFundMe to cover travel expenses coming up and things I just did. So shout out to everybody. Last song coming up. Here we go. Garfield never jumped on. I guess he ran out of time. It is what it is. Great show. Newark Holy Stones. Let me know if you want more on this. For now, we got to go.
Newark Holy Stone. Take down.
David, Rick, Hopewell Indian Mounds.
Discovered in the 1800s, but a dunder had blundered. Check the Hebrew text and I wonder why is it written in a modern block script? Newark Stones, the topic, fraudulent, the optics, bullet is a hoax. You need to stop it, drop it, no. If it's a fact, then I ask the obvious, why is the keystone?
Just leave them alone. Just leave them alone. But then
just then, in about 5 months, a new stone emerged to give you what you want. The Hebrew seemed older, even archaic. The 10 Commandments engraved and displayed it, but somebody done faked it and played it. Prophets were sacred, now I gotta say it. No Jew drew an ancient Hebrew, it's quite true. An American made it, take it as it is. It's supposed to be Moses, the local town dentist. Most likely composed this, know this. Hoaxes for days, from Ohio I relayed this info to you from the museum display. Hey. No, 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 no stone. Just leave them alone. Just leave them alone. No, 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 no stone. The Holy Stone story is quite the odyssey. All evidence points to a poor forgery, designed to prop up the Hebraic native theory. Hear me, the stones bear earmarks of straight trickery. Despite the process, the LDS still confess the stones are for real, they feel they possess proof that natives were white laymanites. Nope, not right, yet the Hebrew Israelites remark that it proves they're 12-tribe chart. Yet despite facts from scholars of archaeology, Jews don't build big dirt mounds, I speak logically. No, no stone. Just leave them alone. Just leave them alone. No, 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 no stone.
Ancient Newark earthworks were built by the indigenous Hope people, and the stones were planted there by a 19th century American forger that houses the stones. And see for yourself in Iron Neck.